Thank you for coming.
You're
For
welcome.
those that don't know me, I'm Julie with Kansas Jewish Federation, the director. Brooke is here also, and Casey is with the mayor's office. Brooke is a fellow. We all need to introduce ourselves to her. She's worked very hard on getting this done. And the mayor, I think, started this whole program when it came to the ground opening the WJCC. So welcome, Mayor, and I'll let him take it from here.
All right. Thanks everyone for being here. This is a great turnout, and luckily we got some break-in weather right now. It's not too hot, it's not raining. It's just very rare that we actually get decent weather for even a few moments, so I won't go beyond a few moments. Just want to just say thanks to the Jewish Community Center for not only everything you're doing, but for inviting us out to do your grand opening. During that time, I remember hearing one of the rabbis talk about the history of the Jewish community and the impact that our neighbors in the Jewish community have had in our city, and it made me think about how we should be celebrating our diversity even more. So going forward, I had a conversation with Brooke, who is one of our fellows, which means she gets paid very little, but does incredible work. Yes, works very hard, gets paid very little. It's usually how it works. Talking with her about, hey, can we actually take this project on to overname a street after the first Jewish mayor, and thanks to her dedication and hard work, even when we had budgets, we have water stuff, we have everything going on, she stayed focused to make sure that this could come forward and be possible. So I want to thank, first of all, your work on this. Thank the Diversity, Inclusion, and Civil Rights Committee that was able to actually serve as the naming committee, and of course, thank the community here, our neighbors in the Jewish community, who not only thought this was a good idea, but wanted that was more supporting. So just very thankful that we can actually come and have the unveiling of this. I almost fell, and just excited to not only for today, but also look towards the future of what more can we be doing to celebrate the diversity of our community and to celebrate really the history, the full history of our community. So as we move forward, please let me know other ways that we could be doing that as a city. Thank you.
Bailey?
Let's get the rabbis to help me out.
Yeah.
Someone call.
Short little hike back, and there's refreshments in there. Everything's bottled water, bottled lemonade. You don't have to worry about the boil. And fruit, everything else was washed off with boiled water. Refreshments, we'll have a seat, and then we'll hear some more. Okay. Brooke, did Casey just tell you what's going on? Okay. I'm not saying his name. Better safe than sorry. Hi, everybody. Thanks again for coming. We're going to get started with our program. I'm going to reintroduce the mayor to you. And Mayor Whipple, thank you so much, and your staff for coming today. I really appreciate the support. And Brooke, wherever you move to, I really appreciate all the work you've put into this and the time and energy. Many meetings you and I have been to, so thank you so much. And I'll turn it over to the mayor. Thanks again, everybody.
But really, I'll be short. I just want to thank everyone for coming out to this event. This has been a really great project. First, I want to thank the Jewish Community Center for the invitation for members of the community to come here during the grand opening or the ribbon cutting or the special event we had when earlier this year. That really got us not only talking as a city about what more we can be doing to really show off the diversity of Wichita, but also building those relationships with the Jewish Community Center here so that we could work together to have a street naming and the overnaming in honor not just the first Jewish mayor of Wichita, Mayor Kohn, but also the contributions that the Jewish community has made to the city of Wichita since really our beginning. So I just want to thank folks who not only thought this was a good idea, but worked with us to make sure that we could get this done. Because again, Wichita, our strength is in our diversity, is in having, in celebrating that, is in talking about the different histories that people have had here in our city and the contributions they have made. And I think that it's really important for us to acknowledge this and frankly brag about it and talk about some of these histories so that folks can ask questions, particularly that next generation can ask the type of questions that might put them in a position to run for leadership roles in the future and carry on that mantle of service to our city. So very happy that this was able to come together. Very happy that we had nice weather, that we could actually go out and see the sign and have an unveiling. And also, I can't say enough good things about Brooke, who is our fellow, and I've said this outside. A fellow pretty much means that you do a lot of work, but you don't really get paid much, but it looks good on your resume. Like, I'm pretty sure that's how a fellowship works at the city. And I remember talking to her about this idea and saying, hey, I really don't have the bandwidth to do this all on my own. Would you help? And she took this project on, did a really good job navigating the process. I've been in government too long. I talk about almost 10 years I've been in politics. And one of the things I'll tell you is things are never easy, especially getting good things done, because it's kind of a system to slow things down. A lot of barriers came up with the renaming process, even though there was no one who was against it. We still had to navigate a system to get this done. And if it wasn't for Brooke navigating that system with us, working with the community, working with our staff, working with the Diversity, Inclusion, and Civil Rights Board, who served as the naming committee, so we didn't have to rename a whole new committee and start that process, finding ways that we could stick to the rules while also finding shortcuts to get to the point that we all wanted to be, then this would still be dragging on. So thank you so much, Brooke, for navigating that system, and thank you for the members of the community who supported this effort so that we could be here today and celebrate this. So again, thank you. Is Brooke the next one? Yep. So let me introduce Brooke. Brooke, our fellow.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brooke. I just wanted to thank the Wichita-Sedgwick County Historical Museum for some of this information I'd like to share with you all today about Saul and his life. So here we go. Solomon H. Kohn was born on June 13th, 1846 in Bohemia, Austria. He emigrated to the U.S. in 1852 and was living in Leavenworth, Kansas by 1860. Saul signed the town charter in 1868 and served as city commissioner in 1871. He became chairman of the commission the following year. Kohn opened the New York store in 1870 and in 1872 established the Wichita Savings Bank. Saul Kohn was one of the founders of Congregation Emmanuel. The intersection of Main and Douglas was the heart of the city, and by 1878, 3 of its 4 corners were occupied by Jewish-owned businesses. The New York store was located on the northeast corner, and the Wichita Savings Bank on the southeast. In 1877, there were fewer than 20 Jewish households in Wichita and no Jewish institutions of any kind. Yet, these residents were respected members of the community and participated in town affairs. Besides the Kohn brothers, at least 9 other Jewish commercial entities existed in Wichita. Saul Kohn was elected mayor by 6 votes over city co-founder William Griffenstein and served 5 months as the first Jewish mayor of Wichita in 1879. Kohn greatly contributed to Wichita's strategic position as the commercial and financial capital of Kansas, and by June of 1879, he announced his intention to resign from the position, and his resignation was official August 1st, 1879. By 1880, he and his wife Lily relocated to New York, and in February of 1880, the couple welcomed a son, Achilles. Saul passed away in New York in 1920. Thank you.
Next, I know a lot of you know Jay Price, professor at WSU. He's going to talk us through a little history lesson, question and answers when he's done, or if he minds throughout, it's totally fine. But Dr. Jay Price.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's wonderful to be able to celebrate somebody like Saul Kohn in what he means in our community. And when you think about Saul, it's not just him as a single individual. He's really part of a larger story. And it's who he knows and how he's connected. One of my alums likes to say, it's not what you know, it's not who you know, it's who knows you. And Saul Kohn, in a lot of ways, embodies that at its best. One of the historians of Wichita, Kaz Harris, talked about William Greifenstein. Now, there's a lot of debate on how you pronounce his name, but as a German, he probably would have pronounced it Greifenstein. And from his home, Strawberry Hill, Water Street, basically where Century 2 is today, more or less, he was surrounded by colleagues. And they included Jim Steele, N.A. English, Fred Daly, Charlie Thompson, M.W. Levy, Saul Kohn, and his brother Morris. And these movers and shakers met on a front porch to determine the fate of the city. And these were people of a variety of backgrounds. Many of them were themselves immigrants, as Greifenstein himself had been, as the French-born Maurice Levy had been, as the Kohn brothers were. And as Hal Rothman, the late Hal Rothman, said, like many places on the periphery, Wichita was too engrossed in its push for recognition as a city to be concerned with rigid hierarchical structures that determine status in the Victorian world. And so you see this collection at Douglas in Maine, where Maurice Levy, who actually was one of the a brother-in-law of the Kohns, is very active in finance and in real estate. He was the junior member of the firms Steele and Levy, who were land agents for the Santa Fe. Across the street, Aaron Katz established the Philadelphia store in the Eagle Block. In the same block was Joseph Karatowski. We had on the southwest side of the intersection M.M. Fechheimer, who was known as one of the leading families, certainly as a clothing merchant, and his wife Gertrude was a mover and shaker in her own right. In fact, you've noticed on land records her name appears as long with his in owning land. And they operated Fechheimer's Grove, just south of Greifenstein's holdings, was a recreation spot. Later on, Fechheimer built a 4-story brick skyscraper right there at the intersection. And so it's in this context that we see names like Kohn, Levy. David and Lee Hayes began as bison hunters in the area and then transitioned into the mercantile venture as well. They got involved in the bison trade, and they shipped so many bison back that they would often could be used as ballast in ships. They were so numerous. And in fact, in 1875, the firm of David and Lee Hayes had shipped out $50,000 worth of hides and tanned robes. So this is the context that brings the Kohns into the conversation. And again, coming from Austria, and remember, the boundaries are fluid back then. There wasn't a Germany as we would understand it, that not until 1871. They would have been part of what we today call the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So Bohemia, Austria, the Czech Republic were part of the same amalgamation, and the German states were aligned and not at the same time. They come to the United States in the 1850s. Being set up in places like St. Louis, where their father, Rabbi Hirsch, had died. Later on, they moved to Leavenworth, where Dora Kohn is active in mercantile ventures. Later on, they get involved in dry goods, and by 1870-71, the Kohns start looking to this new community of Wichita. And in fact, in February of 1871, the newspaper says that a large stock for the Texas cattle trade will be able to furnish goods at wholesale and retail. Saul H. Kohn and Company have the leading dry goods store. Their stock is well selected and makes quite a good display. It was located basically on Main Street, not that far from what's today the Occidental Hotel. And in 1871, there's a real question about whether we're going to keep the cattle industry. And there's a founding story of the Four Horsemen of Meade and English and Mahar and Steele riding out and diverting a cattle herd that was going out to the west and getting it through Wichita and so forth. That story has kind of landed in Wichita mythology, but there's another layer to this story behind it. Not long after this event was to have taken place, from what we can determine from the newspapers, another meeting took place on May 13th, and a committee of 7 was formed to persuade the cattle industry to stay in Wichita, and it just so happened that Saul Kohn was treasurer of that. And we would have been finished as a cattle center, though, had railroads not been involved. When the Santa Fe decided it's going to push out west and bypass Wichita entirely, what do? Wichita leaders formed the Wichita and Southwestern. They formed their own railroad. And they formed this in June of 1871. And you guessed it, Saul Kohn is absolutely in the midst of setting up that road that would connect Newton down to Wichita. And by doing that, that saved Wichita as a cattle center. Now the cattle trail is going to go up to Wichita, then they're loaded onto cattle cars and then shipped on up to Chicago and points beyond. Kohn becomes active in the county commission, becomes active in banking. In 1872 is one of the founders of the Wichita Savings Bank. And he serves as vice president. And one of the key figures in this bank was a fellow by the name of A.A. Hyde. Some of you may know A.A. Hyde as the founder of Mentholatum. So, I mean, there's a connection there. And then the Kohns become active in developing not just banking but real estate. And it's really Morris Kohn, his older brother, who's active in establishing the premier store downtown, the New York store. As it says in the newspaper, the Kohn brothers have just completed the final arrangements for the new enterprise in our midst. On Saturday last, they bought the corner lot on Main and Douglas, upon which has stood for several years a small wooden structure. And ground is broken and on a large brick building. And this is going to be the great department store of downtown Wichita in 1874 when it opens. And there's our movers and shakers marrying into different families. Miss Sarah Kohn, their sister, marries M.W. Levy. And the newspaper, being the newspaper as it was at the time, put it this way. I couldn't resist not including this. By this Kohn tract, concluded Levy is concealed in a conjugal conjugation. The conjointly consented to consort which we consolingly contemplate. May the new bride contrive to control the controverted conveyancer. Why conceive more cones when it is so certain they will all result in little Levies? And things continue to develop. In 1878, he goes back to New York, where Saul Kohn is married. And the next year, he is nominated by acclamation to be the candidate for mayor. And as the newspaper put it at the time, Mr. Kohn has been tried by the people in an important position, and he has never failed them. In April 3rd, he is elected. He wins by 5 votes over William Greifenstein, inaugurated in April 14th. And what's unique about this, if you look at the newspapers, is what's not said. They don't mention he's Jewish. They don't mention he's an immigrant. They don't mention his background. Didn't matter. They very much mentioned he was a Republican, and they were very concerned about that, or celebrated that, depending on the newspaper, as opposed to Greifenstein, who ran as a Democrat. So they carried about that, but the background wasn't their full point, and that says something. And this is part of a larger trend in the 19th century. Western towns had a tradition of electing immigrants and including Jews as mayors, as leaders. After all, in 1870, San Francisco had a higher percentage of its population who were Jewish than New York. Kenneth Lebo, historian Kenneth Lebo says, so successful were Jewish pioneers that by 1900 there wasn't a single settlement west of the Mississippi of any significance which had not had a Jewish mayor. This included cities such as Deadwood, Dodge City, Tombstone, Boise, Idaho, Albuquerque. And so a number of cities out west had Jewish mayors. So Saul Kohn is very much part of this tradition. And he's active early on in trying to make the city run better. He declines to take a salary. And that's noteworthy. He says, I can support myself. I don't need to take a salary. And that was able to offset some of the city budget. I don't know if the mayor wants to continue that tradition or not. Supported a subscription for supporting African American refugees in 1879. There's a migration of African Americans out of the South, looking for new opportunities in places like Kansas. So supporting African Americans is part of the story. And then things start to change, and there seem to be a lot of layered conversations that happen in other parts of the city. Now, I know this doesn't happen today, but back then there were political and social issues that kind of revealed themselves in local power struggles, and then that the mayor gets in crossways within that, and sort of the collateral damage between these different factions. I know that never happens today, fortunately, but that was absolutely what happened in Wichita. And what it seems to have happened were these two candidates who were vying for a position on the city council, and they were revolved around the issue of alcohol. That was becoming the key issue. Temperance was the big issue at the time. And so William Greifenstein had closed down saloons on Sundays, but it had been largely unenforced. Well, now the enforcement of that, especially in the downtown area, was a big issue of these two folks going back and forth. And Saul Kohn got in the crosshairs on that because he was simply trying to enforce the laws. And so let's reinforce the closing of the saloons. Well, that didn't go over well on the other side. And you can read this in between the lines of the newspaper. Nevertheless, and notwithstanding all that intimated last week, we're trying to know what the facts were. And the tying of crepe on the door of the mayor's house and effigy burning business were in bad taste. Crepe was a symbol of mourning. And so there were symbolic things, and there was this local tension that seemed to be part of it. It wasn't Kohn. That wasn't exactly it, but it was part of this collateral conversation. And Kohn tries to reform the city, getting moved forward, and it's just not working out. So much so that by July, he announces his intent to resign and then goes on vacation to Colorado. And the newspaper, again, tells you a little bit about this. Mr. Kohn, we believe, persists in his determination to resign. As we said last week, we very much regret the step. The Republicans of the city elect him after a hard struggle, but it was out and open, and his resignation leaves them in an awkward position, and so they continue on with it. But it is due to the men who stood by him that he holds the place and power delivered to his power, and we hope that he may reconsider his determination. They wanted him to stay. He wasn't forced out, but he was tired of the infighting that happened, and so the council accepts by resignation his resignation July 30th, 1879. And again, the way it's talked about tells you something. One of the papers said, Mayor of Wichita has resigned. Mr. Kohn is a young man of fine executive ability and a very successful businessman. We did not learn what particular reasons he had for resigning, but from our personal knowledge, we judge he had good ones. Chances are that the Honorable William Greifenstein, founder of Wichita, will be his successor. And so again and again, he steps down in some ways to be out of the fray and maintains that reputation that had brought him into power. And shortly after that, he moves out to New York. He relocates back to New York, but he doesn't divorce himself from Wichita. He remains active. He and his brother become active in banking and all sorts of activities, even as they're in New York. Eventually, Morris Kohn will relocate back to New York as well. But they're still going to be active in various financial activities here in Wichita throughout the 1880s and 1890s. And so we start thinking about this as how that little corner continues to develop. Maurice Levy definitely continues some of the legacy as well, and they work together with the family. Ultimately, Morris Kohn sells the store in the 1870s, and in 1909, the store will be torn down. That old block will be torn down and will become the Schweiter block. Across the street, meanwhile, the Wichita Eagle block will be torn down and replaced with the Boston store. This legacy of another Kohn, C-O-H-N, not K-O-H-N, and Wallenstein and Kohn's Boston store will remain as this icon in downtown Wichita. So the story continues. And the tradition of people of the Jewish community being active in Wichita will continue in so many different ways. If we had a few more hours, we could begin to scratch the surface on that. But you think about all the names of the businesses, or Sheldon Kamen, who was served Wichita City Commission and then later served as mayor. At the time, not an elected position, but cycled through. The commissioners became mayor, but again, that tradition continues as well. And I think, again, this is part of a context that Saul Kohn brings, that this is a city that has had people of different backgrounds right from the start. And we continue that tradition. So talking about diversity, immigration, is not a new conversation. If anything, it's exactly who we are. So, thank you. And now the most dangerous part, the Q&A. Yeah,
Did Riverstein, did he become the mayor after Saul?
he did, yes. And actually, as it turned out, in that contested ward, Morris Levy was one of the councilmen. So, yeah, Greifenstein had been mayor before he became mayor again.
Questions and answers? No?
Yes.
You did not mention how economically challenging the times were. I can remember from my high school history books the panics of 1873 and the panic of 1893. And so these capitalists coming through there and maintaining their business, when today a lot of businesses declare themselves bankrupt for tax purposes every 7 years. So it really says something about their staying power and their knowledge.
You know, that staying power really does speak to the Kohn legacy, especially if you look at like the Wichita Savings Bank and the New York store. You know, the New York store opens in 1874. Right when you have the panic of 1873, the cattle trade is starting to shift out west. Oh, and you have plagues of locusts, literal locust plagues, coming on in at exactly the same time. So yeah, maybe giving up on it and going to better places made a lot of sense, and they didn't. They stuck around. That's a really good observation. And then in the bust years of the 1890s, there's a huge conversation, and that really ushers in a shift in the community, both the Jewish community, but also Wichita as well. Absolutely. Well, with that, continue to celebrate the legacy of Saul Kohn, celebrate what we're doing here, and thank you again for the opportunity.
And thank you again for coming. I really appreciate the great turnout, short notice, and midday afternoon, and thank you.